North Carolina, and we are glad to have you as part of our Bible study today. Please feel free to interact as we're going along and continue to be in conversation with me if you'd like through my email address, revlev@nccumc.org, and I look forward to hearing from you. But right now we're going to be studying the second part of chapter 12, beginning at verse 13, and see where the Bible takes us today. Take care that you do not offer your burnt offerings at any place you happen to see, but only at the place that the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do everything I command you. So basically, again, as we mentioned last week, there's a design to centralize worship in Jerusalem. That's the place that the Lord picked out. And everybody, by the time they were reading Deuteronomy, knew that that was the place that the Lord picked out because there was a temple there and kind of obvious. Okay. Yet whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat meat within your own towns according to the blessing that the Lord your God has given you. The unclean and the clean may eat of it as they would of gazelle or deer. And what he's talking about, the unclean and the clean may eat of it, means that both you and Gentiles can eat of it, okay? Which is a nasty way of talking about Gentiles, I thought. The blood, however, you must not eat. You shall pour it out on the ground like water, nor may you eat within your towns, the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, the firstling of your herds and your flocks, any of your votive gifts that you vow, your freewill offerings or your donations. These you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God at the place of the Lord your God will choose, together with your son, your daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite, resident in your town, rejoicing in the presence of the Lord your God in all your undertakings. Take care that you do not neglect the Levite as long as you live in the land. Well, I'm all for that.
When this was written, had Israel and Judah split?
Yes.
They had split.
They had split. Okay. So anyway, what he's saying is that your normal meals, you eat in your town. You don't have to come to Jerusalem to eat those meals. But if you're going to have a religious aspect to it, or some kind of a vow attached to it, it's got to be done in Jerusalem. And you got to bring the whole bunch with you. And we're all going to eat together. And the idea is that these are okay, this is bad, but for the most part of our history, the main military force was the militia, the state militia. And the militias would have like monthly meetings, and the whole town would turn out, and it was a big festival when the militia would get out and they would march in formation or try to. I don't know how good they could get at it once a month, but they'd have to bring their weapons and fire them off, and they'd have a big meal, and everybody get drunk. And that's basically how military training took place in most of the history of the United States. Well, this is kind of a gathering of the militia. Everybody gets together, and they're going to have a party whenever these things are taking place in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is just the hot spot to be. It's like Times Square on New Year's Eve. When the Lord your God enlarges your territory, as he has promised you, and you say, I am going to eat some meat, because you wish to eat meat, you may eat meat whenever you have the desire. How about, I like that. No vegans out there, okay? If the place where the Lord your God will choose to put his name is too far from you, and you slaughter as I have commanded you, any of your herd or flock and the Lord has given you, then you may eat within your towns whenever you desire. Indeed, just as gazelle or deer is eaten, you may eat it. The unclean and the clean may eat alike. Only be sure that you do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life with the meat. So blood is a big deal. Do not eat it. You shall pour it out on the ground like water. By the way, what we do, the custom after Holy Communion, is that The leftover grape juice, if it is not consumed, is to be poured out on the ground. And this is also true with the holy water from baptism, that we pour that out on the ground as well. We don't flush it away or put it down the sewer. We find plants that need it. And what I would do is take the acolytes and say, here's the water. Go find a plant that really needs it. And they go outside and put the water on the plant. Okay, do not eat it, you should pour it out. Okay, do not eat it so that all may go well with you and your children after you because you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. But the sacred donations that are due from you, and your votive gifts you shall bring to the place that the Lord will choose. You shall present your burnt offering, both the meat and the blood, on the altar of the Lord your God. The blood of your other sacrifices shall be poured out beside the altar of the Lord your God, but the meat you shall eat. So nothing's going to waste. Okay? And what they're doing is a portion of the sacrifice will go to the priest, and the remainder is going to go back to the family. So there are certain select portions of a sacrifice that the priest and the Levites are entitled to anytime there's a sacrifice. Some offerings, depending on the nature of the offering, are totally consumed and they're not eaten. But for most of the offerings, you understand that this is a way to pay the priest and the Levites for what they're doing. It's kind of interesting how that works. And we're going to see later on how we get all that corrupted, but we'll just see what the baseline is right here. Okay, be careful to obey all these words that I command you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you forever, because you will be doing what is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God. And now the final paragraph in chapter 12. When the Lord your God has cut off before you the nations whom you are about to enter to dispossess them, when you have dispossessed them and live in their land, take care that you are not snared into imitating them after they have been destroyed before you. Do not inquire concerning their gods. Say, how did these nations worship their gods? So that's interesting. You can't even ask what they were doing. Just assume that what they were doing was wrong, and you don't want to do whatever was wrong, so don't even find out how. How about that? You must not do the same for the Lord your God, because every abhorrent thing that the Lord hates they have done for their gods. They would even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. Oh, now see, he's giving them a hint what they've been doing. Okay, you don't have to ask, I'm just telling you. Okay, you don't want to do that. You must diligently observe everything that I command you. Do not add to it or take away anything from it. Now that's kind of interesting. Do not add to it or take anything from it. One of the things that religions are just really good at is adding to and taking away.
Yes.
You ever notice when you were growing up that there were some things you weren't supposed to do that somehow were never written in the Bible? Of course, we didn't have movies in the Bible, you know. They had dances, but, you know, they encouraged you to go to those. It's amazing, you know. The Bible tells you about how to drink responsibly and how to use wine, and yet in some religions you just can't even touch the stuff. Can't be around the stuff. And I don't know. I finally come to the conclusion I don't want to out Jesus. So
And there's some there where there's no dancing or music.
no dancing. Some no music in church. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
but in the Bible it tells you about,
Have at it.
you know,
Celebrate.
dancing and parties.
Right.
And,
Wine.
yeah,
Wine.
wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and musical instruments.
Musical instruments. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you're going to worship the Lord, make it a happy time. And I'm not saying,
Joyful noise.
huh?
Says make a joyful noise.
Yes, that's right.
That was me. in the
That's
choir.
right. And last week I couldn't make any noise. But yeah, the Bible's all about expressing your faith with joy and with a gladness and with exuberance. And there's no reason for us to be dour. And I mean, you take a look at the way Christianity has been interpreted by different faiths. Some faiths are too celebratory, and some are just too dour. We take a look at the Pilgrims, and when the Pilgrims came over here, they were going to establish the kingdom of God, and they had all kinds of restrictions on human behavior. They did have ale, okay. One of the reasons they brought the ship in early to Plymouth Rock was that they ran out of ale. So, even the Pilgrims had their thing. The problem the Pilgrims had was that when they got here, the Pilgrims weren't the only ones on the ship. There was also the crew. And the crew weren't exactly pilgrims. So then they had to learn how to coexist while they fixed the ship. And it got to be interesting. We have always had this tension. The church has always had this tension with the society around us. And, we see things that go to excess, and then we excessively restrict it. And it's just, we play silly games, okay? And the Bible's best advice is all things in moderation. And that's really the best way to go. But there have been a lot of people who've been absolutely turned off from following Christ because some of the rules we've imposed on them were just silly. They were silly. They did keep me out of trouble when I was a kid, though, I'll say that. At least I didn't get caught.
Living in a person who talked to you.
Yeah, he said his daddy caught him with a deck of cards. one
Oh,
time.
my.
In the 3rd grade.
Oh,
Oh,
not good.
And they sent me home. My father came by and said, there's nothing wrong with that,
Uh-huh.
because I wasn't gambling or
Right.
so. Anyway,
I remember my mom and dad moved to a new church, and I wasn't there, but I've heard the story. They had a ladies group, and they liked to play canasta or something. And so they invited my mother, the preacher's wife, to come. And they said, well, let's we're going to be playing canasta. And so Mom said, well, I'm not too familiar with cards, but I'd be glad to deal. And so they passed her the deck. And man, she spread that thing out and jumped it up.
yeah,
And I thought you were Nazarene. But
In Las Vegas, right?
yeah, my mom was good at stuff. I'll tell you what. She was the realistic one in the household. No mess with Mama. But I'll tell you what, she had a good head on her shoulders and had everything in balance. I know it was a big disappointment, but anyway. So here these people are not supposed to have any idolatry. They're not supposed to have anything to do with idolatry, and they're not supposed to even study what these other religions were like. Now, I have found that it has been beneficial to me to study other religions, especially religions where I lived in the culture, because you really need to know why people think the way they do, and how they set their value systems. And I'll tell you, in Asian cultures especially, their value system is very different from ours. It's not easy for them to understand Judaism and Christianity. It's just so different from the way they've been taught and the way they live. And we look at some of the things that they do and say, well, that's silly, but man, they look at some of the things we do and they can't understand why in the world anybody do the stuff that we do. trying to get to a point where you can have conversation with somebody of another faith should not begin with, well, you're stupid. Okay? Trying to understand somebody's faith, you need to be able to hear what they're telling you about what faith they have. And then you're going to find, like Paul, when Paul went to Greece, he went to Athens. And Athens was a very religious town. They had a temple for every kind of god you can imagine. And he said, I see that you're very religious people. And that was, he started out with a compliment. I see you're very religious people, and you have one temple over here to the unknown God. Let me tell you who it is. And he worked it right in. He worked it right in. And he didn't insult anybody. I mean, when they got down to it, when it got to be a point where he wasn't really promoting idolatry, which was one of the major points of commerce in that community, they didn't like him anymore because he was undercutting their market. So, it's just, you need to be aware of where people are coming from and try to understand them. I sat down with a very devout Muslim when I was in Saudi, and he was explaining to me why I should convert to Islam, and he was trying to give me a Quran. And he was very gracious, and he thought, I'm going to do you this great favor. I will give you a Quran. And I said, that's wonderful. Can I give you a Bible? No.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why is it that at least I've seen it is that Muslim countries seem to be more devout or more, what's the right word?
Okay, I'm going to say something that's going to make Muslim people very angry.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm not
And I
a Muslim, so
apologize,
don't worry.
but this has been my experience. All right? I was in Rafah, and that's a backwater town in Saudi Arabia. It's a pump station town along the pipeline that goes through Jordan. And when I was in Rafah, I was getting hungry, and it was past traditional lunchtime, but I wanted to get something to eat. And they had a little restaurant in Rafah. And in that little restaurant, they had a pretty good menu, okay? And so I wanted to get some lamb, because they do a good job with that over there. So I ordered the lamb, and they set it down in front of me, and I was just about to take the first bite, and the busboy comes by and starts picking up my plate. And I said, no, you're not. And he looked around, he was very nervous. And I said, this stays here, okay? And he looked at the boss, and the boss was like, and I couldn't understand why everybody was so nervous, But, when you have a customer who's got a 9mm, you just don't pick up the plate. So they went around and they closed all the windows, and they locked the door, and they were peering out into the street. And I finally figured out what was going on. It was prayer time, and the religious police were patrolling the streets to see what businesses were open during prayer time. And if they found that that restaurant was open during prayer time, they would come in and beat everybody up. Okay? Now, I know that there are people who are devout Muslims. I know that there are. And I've met them. And they're very kind and gracious to me. And they're wonderful people. Okay? And they look out for their families and all of that. But when you've got somebody patrolling the street who's going to beat you up if you're not doing what the religion calls for, it calls into question the level of devotion that you actually have. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When religion becomes coercive, it is no longer a matter of faith, it's a matter of fear. And I know we're supposed to fear the Lord, but that's not what the Bible fear word means. Okay? So, and I saw that time and time again in Muslim countries. Infidels are tolerated because you can tax them as infidels. They got to pay an extra tax. So they don't want to convert everybody, because that messes up their tax base. But Christianity has had its periods when it has been coercive as well. And we made a lot of converts, we thought, but not necessarily. Okay? That's not the way Christ taught. That's not the way Christ taught. But there are other religions that don't follow Christ, and they're still following what they've been taught. So, anyway, we're not supposed to have a dialogue with these folks. And I asked that Muslim guy, I said, how do you know, how can you be absolutely sure about your religion if you haven't heard about anybody else's religion? How can you compare it if you don't know what you're comparing it to? You know? So,
What was his answer?
his answer was that that simply does not compute in an Arab mind. Okay? That's counter to everything that the man has ever been taught, and it's counter to every law that's been passed in their country. If I was just a tourist and I was having that conversation with that Muslim guy, and he offered me a Quran and I offered him a Bible, I could be arrested for that.
Even now?
Yes. Even now. They're getting more tolerant. They're getting more tolerant in a lot of the Arab states. UAE is very, very tolerant of other religions so far, but they only go so far. In Saudi Arabia, you could have a church, but you had to have a church in your foreigner compound. You couldn't have a church on the street.
You definitely need to stay in the compound.
Yeah.
My
And
brother
if
travels a lot over there.
and if they found out that you had converted somebody from Islam, that's a capital offense, both for you and the person who converted. So what we're looking at here are scriptures that formed in many respects the basis for Islam. Because Muhammad learned monotheism from Jewish people that he was trading with. So a lot of what's in the Quran comes from our Old Testament. Okay? This falls right into place.
And maybe I'm just not really aware, but was Muhammad a real person?
Oh yes, most definitely. He really was he was a really real person.
Oh,
When did he live?
I think 12th century. So, as religions go, it's a fairly recent thing. But it really, in many respects, has not moved out of the 12th century.
When they changed their name to Muhammad, does that mean something special to them? I mean, I knew some people that changed their name when they.
Yeah, it means that
joined.
they've adopted Islam,
Right,
But there are other Islamic names that people adopt.
yeah.
Muhammad is very common. It's
Common.
just like, and there's a whole bunch of Jesus in Mexico,
Uses everywhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
so you can't use the name Muhammad as a regular name?
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a lot of Arab men are called Muhammad. Yeah, that's a that's probably the most common name in Islam. And they don't take it as a, they don't take it lightly. It's not just a spin-off. It's a way of honoring the prophet.
Is it true that Muhammad, I think I've heard this, that he was trade routes that
Oh,
went
yes.
through the Jewish country, and he liked the way they had one God,
Yes.
and that's where he got his basis from, was the Jewish religion.
Yeah, the foundation of monotheism in Islam came from a Jewish influence. Now, he was frustrated because he could not convert the Jewish community to Islam. Okay? So, when he couldn't convert them, he attacked them. Which is not out of character when you read through the Old Testament what Jews were doing the other way. Okay? Kind of goes around, comes around type of thing. And there is not in the Old Testament any desire to be in dialogue with any religion outside of Judaism. And that gets really emphasized in chapter 13. And I'm just going to give you the first paragraph of 13. It's a short chapter, but when you start looking at Josiah's reform, you understand it a lot better. If the prophets or those who divine by dreams appear among you and promise you omens or portents, and the omens or portents declared by them take place, and they say, "Let us follow other gods, whom you have not known, and let us serve them," you must not heed the words of those prophets or those who divine by dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you indeed love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. The Lord your God shall follow him alone. You shall follow him alone. Him alone you shall fear. His commandments you shall keep. His voice you shall obey. Him you shall serve, and to him you shall hold fast. But those prophets, or those who divine by dreams, shall be put to death for having spoken treason against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and redeeming you from the house of slavery, to turn you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. It gets worse as we go into chapter 13. Now, I read a biography, an autobiography from a KGB spy, and one of the things that the KGB would do, they had spies here, lots of them, and one of the things that they would do, they had a branch of the KGB that was about security for themselves, and they would go to a spy's residence posing as Christians, or sometimes not even that, and they would offer the person a Bible. And sometimes they wouldn't even present themselves. They would just drop a Bible outside their door, and then they'd see whether or not the person picked it up and took it in. If they took it in, they were reassigned back to Moscow for some reason, and that was the end of them. These people aren't playing around, and so what you're looking at here is there's not going to be any talk. There's not going to be any dialogue. If anybody even hints that they want you to convert, then that person should be put to death, and that is in the Old Testament, and that is in the Quran. So we don't see it so much in the New Testament. Jesus wasn't a big fan of stoning. So, all right. Well, it's been good being with you. And listen, we are getting into some pretty deep weeds when it comes to chapter 13 and 14. You're going to see some really tough stuff in the rest of those chapters. So take a look at them while we mull over what's going on. And I'll see you next week. God bless you all. Have a great week. And gosh, yeah, read that stuff. We'll talk about it next week. Give me an email if you got a question. Okay?
Dennis, the day they close the